Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you here for the final talk on this stage. My name is Serena Chaudhry, and it's a great pleasure to be hosting this talk today on Does Storytelling Have a Purpose? Now, initially when I came across it, I thought, yeah, of course, all stories have to have a purpose. But then if you start to delve into it, maybe they don't. I'm going to start off by showing you a video. So can we please have the first video, which is from a Save the Children campaign.
Happy birthday to you.
Make a wish. Granny.
Hello.
Have you done your homework? Ada.
Ready or not? Here it comes.
Violent clashes with live ammunition against.
Deserve to get shot.
Have a nice day, Mum.
Airstrikes on rebel position.
We are going to stay.
What's happening?
Go.
Having fighting in Richmond.
Where are we?
Rebel forces advancing.
Happy birthday to you. Make a wish, darling.
So this video was done by Save the Children, your most shocking second of a day. We also have the creative agency behind it. But I want to start with Jess from Save the Children. Tell us a little bit about how this story came into existence and the purpose behind it as well.
So we wanted to make this film because we wanted people to still care about what was happening in Syria. It was about 2.5 years into the conflict, and it wasn't in the media. The refugee crisis, which we're seeing all across the Mediterranean, wasn't happening as much at that point, and so it wasn't in the media. People weren't supporting the situation. They didn't care as much. And what we wanted to do was create a piece of content which reminded people that it was still going on. And we went to Don't Panic because we were really impressed with the work they had done. They'd done before, and it was their idea to come up with this kind of juxtaposition of our safe, privileged lives in the UK compared with what was happening to children in Syria. We didn't really anticipate it would go so completely viral, but that's how it came about.
Well, I mean, the video tends to resonate with you because when you're watching it, you're being put into the lives of what it could possibly be like to live in Syria. And with regards to a lot of the work that Save the Children does, do you often tend to look at whether each story has to have a purpose? Is that your focus when you go out there to tell something?
Yeah. I think we would have failed if other content we make doesn't have a purpose. Sometimes that purpose is really clear. We're asking you for money, we're asking you to do something. And sometimes it's much more opaque and actually is more about engagement with the situation. So this film, at the end of the film, we didn't say to people, please give us money to support children in Syria. And Syrian and refugee children, we didn't ask you to do anything, because actually what it was about was trying to change opinions and trying to grow empathy amongst the public who may then support the work that we do. So it wasn't. It was a more opaque, less clear purpose, but there was definitely a purpose, and there always is with the content that we make.
Yeah, and raising awareness in that particular video. Joe, I want to bring you in there because you're also very much involved in this Syrian video. When they came to you, what was the thought process that went behind for you guys? Because a lot of it is also creativity. So do you as an agency tend to focus more on creativity than on the purpose behind the narrative?
Well, I think working for an organisation like Save the Children, it will always have a purpose. But I think the challenge is to recontextualise the purpose to make it interesting to a broader audience, because I think there is an audience who are interested in what's going on in Syria, but the challenge was to bring that to a broader audience. And I think, as Jess was saying, putting it in the UK setting did that. We also, there was an app that was really popular at that point called Second a Day app, which was allowed parents to film their children for a second a day so you could see them growing up. So we sort of used that format, and that kind of drew in a new audience. I think also there's other sort of bits within that do make it interesting for an audience, such as the first half of the film is exactly mirrored, the scenes are mirrored in the second half. So for example, the grandma's brushing her hair in the first half, whereas in the second half her hair's falling out. So we sort of tried to add as many layers as possible to make it more shareable, I guess, and make it interesting to different audiences who may be turned off by the kind of standard NGO sort of films. Yeah, and I think in terms of that app that parents were using, the reason that was a good thing to go for was parents tend to be the kind of people who want to be involved in the work of Save the Children. If they've got their own kids, there's more empathy there. So by using that format, we were able to sort of appeal to their empathy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about empathy, and Avril, I want to bring you in here because you're actually using storytelling and using a completely different format, using new technology, using VR to tell stories. And before I actually get into a discussion with you, I just want to show all of you out there one of the videos that Avril's been working on. So may we have the second video, please?
You will feel drowsy and fall asleep within 4 to 5 minutes. Then you slip into deep unconsciousness. Are there any last words? Are you sure you wish to drink this, in which you will sleep and will die?
That's just a snippet of the film that you've been working on, which looks at an assisted suicide and what a person goes through in those final moments. Tell us a little bit about the film.
So it first started when I wrote a script, and it was quite a funny script actually. It was about a door-to-door salesman that was selling euthanasia. So it was quite sort of different in tone. But when I started researching this script, I discovered a little bit more about euthanasia and the fact that in the UK, the laws on assisted suicide were actually being discussed in Parliament, and Lords were talking about it and discussing it. And I thought this was actually quite a relevant subject because, you know, what would the UK look like if assisted suicide was to come into practice and it became the norm? And so I did a little bit more investigation and discovered that there was an exhibition on at Bristol Museum, and they had a replica room of the room at Dignitas. And I thought, oh, fantastic opportunity to use this room as a space, as a film set. And I thought, oh, brilliant, let's make a film and actually empower the viewer to really question whether that assisted suicide should be legalised or not, and actually use the film as a sort of a question to the audience and really make people think about the laws in this country.
And with regards to this film, it's very new technology. What was it like filming using VR cameras? And I think it took you about 4 months to make the film?
It did. Well, from the very beginning to research everything. But actually the filming time itself took about 3 hours. We only had a very small window of time to do the whole thing. I guess really quickly, the difficult thing about filming live action VR is that you can't call cut. And wherever you put the camera, you have to clear the space. So the crew have to be completely out of the picture. I worked very intensely with my actors, and they had to play the action continuously without any breaks. So it was more like an immersive piece of theatre, and for them it was much more emotional to do that because they had to stay in character all throughout. which was a fantastic experience. But also I had to sort of work with them and make sure that they were okay, because it's actually quite a gripping, difficult piece of drama to play.
Yeah, and I guess, it's a completely different situation because you're telling a story with obviously a purpose, but the viewer is essentially being able to live that purpose in some way. So is this the future of storytelling? Is this the future of storytelling?
I hope so. I think so. I think that making this film for me has given sort of a glimmer of understanding that, or the excitement of allowing the viewer to actually feel, physiologically have the effects, the emotional effects of being in that space that you're telling the story in. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing to harness as a filmmaker.
We've looked at obviously two different formats here in terms of telling stories, but something I feel like in today's interconnected world and globalization, how do you then, with a story, transcend different cultures to make people understand what you're trying to tell? And I'm going to start with you there, Jess. I mean, what sort of work do you do? Because obviously Save the Children is a global organization. Mm-hmm. And in order to get that story out to different cultures, to make people from different perspectives understand, what are the key elements that you look at?
So I guess I'll start off by saying not very much of the content that we make is meant for multiple global audiences. So there is some of it, but we actually, when we're making content, we're very specific about who we're trying to talk to and why we're trying to talk to them. And I think it's really important to remember that different audiences will respond in different ways. Joe gave a really good example in his talk earlier of an advert with comedians where they had written a different script per country they were in and shot it with comedians from those countries each time to make it relevant to those audiences. So that's something that when we are making global content, that we also think about doing, is how do you make it relevant. I think ultimately what it comes down to is a brilliant story. If you want something to be relevant globally, it needs to be a brilliant, a really gripping story, and probably with not too much text and speaking in it, because then you get over the language problem. So one of the reasons that Second a Day went so viral globally was because you don't need to be able to understand English to watch it. And I think virtual reality has a similar benefit. We've just made our first VR film, and there's very little speaking in it as well, because actually it's just about being immersed in that world and being able to visit a world that you would never normally get to go to. And you kind of, even if people are speaking, you kind of don't need to understand everything that they're saying, as long as the story is pulling you along in the right direction and the narrative itself is gripping enough.
Sure, I want to get your thoughts on that as well from the agency perspective, because making something culturally understandable, what do you think? How easy is it to do that, to transcend different cultures with the same story?
I think with the, as Jess says, the Second a Day one worked well. I think it depends what kind of audience you're going for, because I think for example, a European and North American audience are fairly similar, but other audiences aren't. So I think it depends who you're going for. And I think doing something truly global is difficult. And, if you look at Hollywood, for instance, the way they're doing it is bringing in talent. So they'll do a film like, I'm going to lower the tone now, but like a Triple X3 or whatever, Triple X2 with Vin Diesel. The way they sort of get a bigger audience is bringing in someone from China, someone from India, stars from Bollywood and stuff. So they do it in a talent-led way, which you can do that. And then there was a video, Talk Your Purpose, for the global goals, that took the Spice Girls I Tell You What You Want video, did a kind of recreation of that on the 20th anniversary of the song, and it was about female empowerment and stuff. And then they did that same thing. They had a Bollywood star, and they put different vloggers in it. So that's one way is using different talent, I guess.
With regards to, I guess, social media as well, I mean, you look at sort of engagement and views and a story. In some ways, stories these days are assessed by how many times they're viewed, how they're liked. How much does a purpose then play? Does it just need to have somebody who's famous in order to be shared, and do you measure that success in that way?
I mean, you get a lot of certainly charity videos with lots of famous people and that don't get shared at all because they're not interesting, and they have There used to be that old way of doing charity videos where celebrities would be clicking their fingers or something like that and against a white background, and that's completely dead now. And it's sort of, people don't want to be told to give money or do something good by Brad Pitt or something, because it's like, well, if you care, you give your money, you know. And it's sort of, I think there's a rejection of that. But I think if you do get well-known people in and use them in a good way and in a creative way and an interesting way that appeals to their fan bases, you know, to take an example, I mean, you could get someone from Game of Thrones and make them do something that's really fun and interesting, or Walking Dead, and then, you know, tap into their audiences, but as long as it doesn't seem fake, I think, yeah. And a lot of those old charity videos do seem really fake, I think.
Yeah.
It's also about using real people in your content. We're going to be releasing a film in the next few months, which is where we asked members of the public to just come and do us a favour by helping us make a film. We didn't tell them what it would be. I'm now going to ruin the big reveal of this film when we release it. But we asked people to come into a room, and what we asked them to do is read from an auto cue of a testimony of someone who has been through something very traumatic. And in this instance, it's women who have lost multiple children when their babies are very young. And we asked them to read the testimony of these, a real testimony, and then we film them face on and film their reaction. And it's very, very simple. We tried it first in Australia with Australian people, and obviously as they're reading the testimony, they realise what they're reading and what they're seeing. You get this very raw, authentic response from them, which is very hard not to be emotionally drawn into. And we've just filmed the British version, which we're releasing soon, and we've filmed a Spanish version as well, which is doing the rounds in Spain at the moment. But I think there's something about tapping into the people like you, and so not necessarily celebrities, but people like you from your culture, that makes it very resonant for an audience, and it can have that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the key with a lot of stories, is establishing that personal connection and looking at the human value. I mean, even if I think back to some of the work I did in the Middle East and in conflict zones, I would want to go and speak to somebody on the street and get that story from them, and not just speak to the authorities, because you want to hear what life is like for them in that specific case, living through bombings, for example. Avril, on your side as well, bringing in VR there, I mean, VR, do you feel that form as a medium just allows anyone across any culture to then just be able to be drawn in and transcend, or do you have to think of a greater purpose or a greater thread within your story in order to attract different people?
I think at the heart of anything that you do, whether it's in VR or just normal film, something that you touched upon earlier, is actually to have a real element of truth, or some, you know, at the heart of it, the idea has to really grab you. So regardless of what culture or where you're from in the world, I think at the very heart of anything that you do, you have to have that little nugget. With the film that I've just done here, I watched about 15 or so people on YouTube committing suicide, having an assisted suicide, and I literally sort of took all those little moments and instances in those things that I watched, and I put it all together in a script, and I sort of picked out these key truths that sort of happened across everything that I watched and put it together in this film. So yeah, I think at the heart of anything that you do, I think you have to really hit upon these raw elements of human emotion that really sort of cut across any sort of cultural boundaries. And
so it's that feeling and that empathy that comes into play at the end of the day, making that human to human connection through emotions, which I think at the Websummit has been quite interesting, because I've been seeing a lot of the talks to do with artificial intelligence, and I went to one yesterday about how to teach AI to actually understand and recognize human emotions. So I think that's also something it's comes to the core of many stories. But I know we're shortly running out of time quite quickly, so I'm going to go back to our original question and throw it to all of you. Jess, does storytelling have to have a purpose at the core?
I thought about this a lot, obviously, before I came and did this. I kind of can't imagine a story that doesn't have a purpose, because while the purpose might not be very explicit, every story that you encounter, whether it's read or viewed or told to you, grows your knowledge of the world and probably changes your perspective, even if it's in a very small way, or could be in a very big way. So I don't think stories have to have purpose. I guess I think that they do, even if it's not deliberate. But for us, for Save the Children, yes, they have to have a purpose. We have a very clear purpose, and we need to make sure that the content we create does too.
Joe, how about you? The content that you guys create, does everyone have to have a purpose?
No, I think there's too much purpose. I mean, the other day I was watching a video that was about a deaf girl learning to play the violin, and it was for Pan 10, so what have they got no business talking about deaf people playing violins? They're a shampoo, so it's kind of, there's too much purpose knocking about. And, comedy, which we sometimes do as well, is famously, if you watch classic sitcoms, the characters never learn anything, and they reset each time, and no one develops, no one knows anything, and they're some of the best stories. So I'd say there's too much purpose around, and I think the advertisers are getting desperate to sort of make their products seem more interesting than they are and go for emotion, whereas, so certainly with Save the Children, when you have a purpose, you have to do purpose storytelling, purpose-driven storytelling. If you don't have a purpose and you're trying to flog shampoo, you should stay out of purpose, in my view.
So what about the average person who has these tools now to tell a story?
What?
Should they then look at just telling the story, telling whatever they're seeing at that moment in time, or should they film whatever they're seeing with a purpose in their mind?
Yeah, I think, they should just tell a good story. It doesn't have to have a purpose. Yeah.
And Avril, final thoughts from you? Does storytelling have to have a purpose?
Yes and no. I think it's really helpful, perhaps sometimes, if you do have one. But also a lot of the VR stuff that I've been seeing recently is just really cool. Like I went to see the Bjork exhibition at Somerset House in London, and one of the films is literally you're inside her mouth, and it's all kind of kaleidoscopic, and I think, well, that doesn't really have a purpose. There's no real story, but it's cool, and it makes you feel really kind of weird. But then obviously, on the other side, some of the most hard-hitting things that resonate with you do, and they stay with you for a very long time, over a lifetime. So, yes and no.
And on that note of yes and no, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists as well.